colonies. England's first colonies. The first English expedition to arrive in North America was led by Italian navigator John Cabot in 1497. For the next 80 years, the English made no effort to settle in America. Cabot had not found a sea route to Asia, nor had he found any riches to encourage migration. In the late 1500s, however, dramatic religious, economic, and political changes in England encouraged the founding of the first English colonies in North America. The Protestant Reformation. At the time Cabot sailed to America, most of Western Europe was Roman Catholic. This unity began to break apart in 1517, when a German monk named Martin Luther published a call for reform of the Catholic Church. Luther's call launched the Protestant Reformation. In England, the rebellion against Catholicism began in 1527, when Henry VIII asked the Pope to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon. The Pope refused. Infuriated, Henry broke with the Church and declared himself the head of England's Church in 1534. The new church, the Anglican Church, was Protestant, but its organization and rituals retained many Catholic elements. Some English people supported the new church, but others wanted more reform. Puritans wanted to purify the Anglican Church of any remaining Catholic element. They also disapproved of the monarch having the power to appoint bishops to run the church. In their view, each congregation should elect its own leaders. The Puritan cause suffered a serious setback in 1603, when James I became king. Although King James was Protestant, he refused to tolerate any changes in the Anglican Church. His refusal to institute reforms eventually caused many Puritans to decide to leave England, some for America. Economic changes in England. During the 1500s, England's population was rising rapidly. Many English leaders concluded that colonies in America were necessary to provide land and work for England's rising number of unemployed. During the same period, the wool cloth trade grew in importance. Eager to find new markets to sell their wool, merchants began organizing joint stock companies. By joining together and issuing stock to investors, merchants were able to raise large amounts of money to fund major projects. They could also afford to trade with and colonize other parts of the world. English colonization was not easy, nor was it always successful. Sir Walter Raleigh sent settlers to Roanoke Island, off the coast of what is now North Carolina, in 1585 and again in 1587. The first group returned to England after a difficult winter. The fate of the second group is a mystery. When English ships finally returned in 1590, the colonies had vanished. The Chesapeake Colonies. In 1606, King James I granted a charter to the Virginia Company, giving its stockholders permission to start colonies in Virginia. The company sent 3 small ships and 144 men to Virginia in late 1606. After a difficult trip, the ships sailed into the Chesapeake Bay in the spring of 1607. The 104 men who survived the trip founded a settlement on the James River, which they named Jamestown. The early troubles of Jamestown. Winters were hard for the Jamestown colonists. In late 1607, Captain John Smith began bartering goods for food with the Powhatan Confederacy. This trade helped the colony survive. The winter of 1609 and 1610 was excruciatingly hard. By spring, only 60 settlers were still alive. Fortunately, 3 English ships arrived with supplies, 150 more settlers, and the new governor, Lord de la Warr, who convinced them to stay. Tobacco saves the colony. The colony still had to find a way to make a profit. The solution was a cash crop, tobacco. In 1614, the colony sent its first tobacco shipment to England. It sold for a good price, and the colonies began planting large quantities of it. In 1618, the Virginia Company granted the colonies the right to elect a lawmaking body. The elected representatives were called burgesses, and the assembly was called the House of Burgesses. The company also introduced the system of head rights. Settlers who paid their own passage to Virginia received 50 acres of land. Settlers also received 50 acres of land for each family member over 15 years of age and each servant they brought to Virginia. In 1619, the first enslaved Africans were transported to Virginia. A Dutch slave ship stopped to trade for supplies, and the Jamestown settlers purchased 20 African men as Christian servants. Within a few years, more enslaved Africans were being transported to the colony. By 1622, about 4,500 settlers had arrived in Virginia. Alarmed, Native Americans attacked Jamestown in March 1622 in an attempt to defend their territory. More than 300 settlers were killed. An English court blamed the Virginia Company and revoked its charter. Virginia became a royal colony with a governor appointed by the king. Maryland is founded. The persecution of his fellow Catholic convinced Englishman George Calvert, who held the title Lord Baltimore, to found a colony where they could practice their religion freely. After Calvert's death in 1632, King Charles granted Calvert's son a large area of land northeast of Virginia. The new colony was named Maryland. Maryland was a proprietary colony. The proprietaire, or owner, had almost unlimited authority over the colony, except that he could do nothing that was contrary to English law. Although founded as a Catholic refuge, most of Maryland's settlers were Protestant. To reduce friction between the two groups, the Colonial Assembly passed the Toleration Act in 1649. This act mandated religious toleration for all Christians, but made denying the divinity of Jesus a crime punishable by death. Pilgrims and Puritans. In England, a group of Puritans called Separatists concluded that the Anglican Church was too corrupt to be reformed. They formed their own congregations, and in 1608, one group fled to the Netherlands to escape persecution. These separatists, later known as Pilgrims, sailed to America in 1620. Plymouth Colony. Before crossing the Atlantic, the Pilgrims returned to England, where they joined other emigrants aboard a ship called the Mayflower. On September 16, 1620, 102 passengers set sail for Virginia. In November, of course, they reached the Cape Cod area and finally came ashore near what is today Plymouth, Massachusetts. While still aboard the ship, 41 colonies signed the Mayflower Compact, a written framework of government. After constructing a common house, the settlers built modest homes. Soon, however, a plague swept through the colony, sparing only 50 settlers. The surviving Pilgrims might have perished had it not been for Squanto, a Wampanoag man who helped them grow corn and showed them where to fish. The following autumn, the Pilgrims joined with the Wampanoag in a 3-day festival to celebrate the harvest and give thanks to God. This celebration later became the basis for the Thanksgiving holiday. Massachusetts Bay Colony. In 1625, Charles I took the throne, and persecution of the Puritans increased. At the same time, a depression struck England's wool industry. The depression caused high unemployment, particularly in countries where large numbers of Puritans lived. As he watched his fellow Puritans suffering both religious and economic hardships, John Winthrop grew concerned. Winthrop and several other wealthy Puritans were stockholders in the Massachusetts Bay Company. The company had already received a charter from King Charles to create a colony in New England, so Winthrop decided to turn his business investment into a refuge for Puritans in America. Other Puritans embraced the idea, and in 1630, 11 ships carrying the first main group of settlers set sail. En route, in a sermon titled A Model of Christian Charity, Winthrop preached that the new colony should be an example to the world. The colony of Massachusetts Bay grew quickly. As conditions in England worsened, more people began to live in what was later called the Great Migration. By 1643, an estimated 20,000 settlers had arrived in New England. The charter of the Massachusetts Bay Company defined the new colony's government and established a general court, which named John Winthrop as the first governor. Puritans kept the governance of church and state separate. They did not tolerate the expression of different religious ideas, however. Heretics, people who disagreed with established religious beliefs, were routinely banished. Eventually, Puritan intolerance sparked conflicts that led to the founding of other colonies. Rhode Island and descent. In 1631, a minister named Roger Williams arrived in Massachusetts. Williams believed Puritans corrupted themselves by staying within the Anglican Church. He also declared that the king had no right to give away Native American land. His views angered many people. In 1635, the Massachusetts General Court ordered him to be deported back to England, but Williams escaped south with a few followers. He then purchased land from the Narragansett and found the town of Providence in 1636. The town's government had no authority over religious matters. Religious beliefs were tolerated rather than suppressed. A year later, a Puritan named Anne Hutchinson questioned the authority of several ministers. The General Court charged her with heresy and banished her. Hutchinson and a few followers headed south and settled near what is now Portsmouth, Rhode Island. Massachusetts later banished other dissenters, who headed south and founded Newport in 1639 and Warwick in 1643. These towns joined Portsmouth and Providence to become the single colony of Rhode Island and Providence plantations. Religious freedom became a key part of the new colony's charter. New England expands. In 1636, Reverend Thomas Hooker, frustrated by the Massachusetts political system, received permission from the Massachusetts General Court to move his congregation to the Connecticut River Valley. They founded the town of Hartford. Hooker helped write the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut. This constitution, adopted in 1639, allowed all adult men to vote. Much of the territory north of Massachusetts was part of a grant to two men, Sir Fernando Gorges and Captain John Mason. The southern part was called New Hampshire, while the territory farther north was called Maine. Massachusetts claimed them both, but in 1679 New Hampshire became a royal colony. Maine remained part of Massachusetts until 1820. King Philip's War. After a 1637 war between the English and the Pequot of New England, relative peace ensued for a few decades through trade. Tensions renewed when in the 1670s as the fur trade declined and as colonial governments demanded that Native Americans follow English law and customs. In 1675, Plymouth Colony arrested, tried, and executed 3 Wampanoag men for murder. This act touched off what came to be called King Philip's War, named after the Wampanoag leader Metacomet, whom the settlers called King Philip. Colonies killed Metacomet in 1676 and then mounted his head on a pike and paraded it through their settlements. By the time the war ended in 1678, few Native Americans were left in New England. England's Civil War and New Colonies. The English Civil War arose from a power struggle between King Charles I and Parliament. In 1642, the king sent troops to arrest Puritan leaders who dominated the governing body. Parliament responded with its own army. Battles between the king's troops and the Parliament's troops resulted in the king's capture and beheading in 1649. The leader of Parliament's troops, Oliver Cromwell, then ruled as a virtual dictator over the new English Commonwealth. After Cromwell died in 1658 and his son unsuccessfully tried to rule in his place, Parliament invited King Charles' son, Charles II, to take the throne. With the monarchy restored in 1660, the English government began backing a new round of colonization in America. New York and New Jersey. The Dutch colony of New Netherlands grew slowly during the early 1600s to aid the colony's growth. The Dutch allowed anyone to buy land. By 1664, New Netherlands had more than 10,000 people, with immigrants from the Netherlands, Britain, Scandinavia, Germany, and France. England and the Netherlands were commercial rivals. In 1664, King Charles II successfully took New Netherlands from the Dutch and granted the land to his brother James, the Duke of York. James renamed the colony New York. He also received and granted to others a large parcel of land between Delaware Bay and the Connecticut River, naming it New Jersey. To attract settlers, the New Jersey colony offered generous land grants, religious freedom, and the right to have a legislative assembly. Pennsylvania and Delaware. The origins of the colony of Pennsylvania lay in a persecuted religious group and a large unpaid debt. The religious group was a society of Friends, also known as the Quakers. William Penn was a member of the Quakers. The Quakers saw no need for ministers and believed in religious toleration. They also believed in pacifism, or opposition to war. Many people viewed these as radical beliefs. In 1681, to settle the debt owed to William Penn's father, Charles II granted Penn a large tract of land between New York and Maryland. Penn wanted his new colony to be a place of political and religious freedom. He also tried to treat Native Americans fairly. Penn named the capital Philadelphia, Greek for City of Brotherly Love. The colony's government provided for an elected assembly and guaranteed religious freedom. Greater religious freedom and available land attracted immigrants. By 1684, Pennsylvania had more than 7,000 residents. In 1682, Penn acquired 3 counties south of Pennsylvania from the Duke of York. These lower counties later became the colony of Delaware. The Carolinas. Charles II was also interested in the land between Virginia and Spanish Florida. Charles awarded much of this territory to 8 friends in 1663. The land was named Carolina, Latin for Charles. The first settlement was named Charlestown. Although Carolina was not divided into 2 distinct colonies until 1729, it developed as 2 separate regions. North Carolina was home to a small population of farmers that grew tobacco as cash crop. Colonies in South Carolina helped to cultivate sugarcane, but it did not grow well there. Instead, they exported deer skin, obtained from nearby Native Americans. The colonies also shipped enslaved Native Americans to the West Indies. The Georgia Experiment. In the 1720s, James Oglethorpe, a member of Parliament, was appalled to find that many of the imprisoned people in England were debtors, not strictly criminals. Oglethorpe asked the king for a colony where poor people could start over. In 1732, King George II made Oglethorpe and 19 others the trustees for the territory between the Savannah and the Altamaha rivers. Oglethorpe named the new colony Georgia in honor of the king. Settlers arrived in 1733, and in 1752, Georgia became a royal colony. By 1775, roughly 2.5 million people live in England's 13 American colonies. Despite the stormy starts in Roanoke and Jamestown, the English had succeeded in building a large and prosperous colonial society on the east coast of North America.